on a given day, you can, especially with what's happening now, you could run through a whole gamut of emotions.
So I was going to do a video about how being a business owner right now is hard. Things aren't great out there for us. But I'm more concerned about the mental health of business owners in a time of crisis. And I realized I was not qualified to talk about that. However, I did know somebody who was. And so I interviewed Kerry Turnbow, who's been a friend of mine for years and has helped a lot of people through hard times. And I hope that this conversation helps people understand what they're feeling and what they can expect to feel in the coming days. So please, go ahead and watch it.
My name is Kerry Turnbow. I have worked in the field of mental health for several years. I have also started and run my own business and have been in the position of an executive director for several years. So my knowledge and awareness of business acumen, it comes through my own personal experience.
Really, I want to start with sort of what I've been noticing, which is I'm talking to lots of business owners all across the state, and chiming in on conversations really all across the world. And no matter what, it just sucks out there for a small business. I think that no one's really talking about the emotional well-being of at least the owner. And I realize everybody is in this, not just owners, but from the owner perspective, like the small business perspective, everybody's just, they're not happy. And so I was wondering if you could give like a little overview of kind of in a time of crisis like this, what are some of the things that people might go through? What are some of the emotions they might see?
Well, to go back to your word, it is not a happy time for any of us. I think the difference is when I think back to different economic crisis, 2008, and various times where we've gone through this, the one thing that's different about this is it's pretty much impacted every one of us. So I think there's a level of, as weird as this may sound, there's a level of sort of camaraderie that comes to know that it's impacted everyone, all of us to some degree. And so you sort of gain a little solace in knowing that there is that connection and people are really reaching out. So the thing I've noticed this time with the news media, the news outlets, the commercials, what you find is you're finding a lot of support, a lot of organizations saying, let's come together and let's work together. So from an emotional standpoint, having operated businesses in that level of emotion, you're sort of going to ride a wave of things. And in this case, you look at your organization, you've got a passion about it. You wouldn't have started it if you didn't have some sort of desire and passion to see it succeed. So on a given day, you can, especially with what's happening now, you could run through a whole gamut of emotions. But overall, the crisis point is you're feeling a sense of dread. There may be this sense of doom that sort of hangs over your head, wondering, what's tomorrow going to bring and how long is this going to last? And those are all valid emotions. The sense of fear, that sense of dread, impending doom. And then there's another part of all of us, I think, that have been in business. We're there because we have a little bit of inside of us. We've got a little bit of entrepreneurial spirit and energy to succeed and strive. So there's another part of us that says, I remember back when I was running a business and when hard times would come, like, okay, Kerry, we got to figure this out. So sometimes you dissociate from those emotions to go, all right, I got to not focus in on that. I got to focus in on how am I going to make this a success and figure out how to problem solve what's going on.
You're right that there is camaraderie out there. Almost everybody is just like, hey, we're all in this together, and we don't know where things are going to land. Are there any sort of like...
Well, let me come back to that.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
However, in the midst of that, we all know at the end of the day, the whole thing still falls on our shoulders. So we can gain solace from that aspect of the community connectedness. But we also, I think, for all of us, there's that point though that it comes back down, and I'm sure that in your mind, my mind, all of us is like, okay, yes, that's true. I appreciate that support, but where the rubber meets the road is it falls down on my shoulders on how to try to figure this out and be solution based to try to figure out how to weather the crisis and keep my business going.
Yeah, it does. And I think there's a level, so there's obvious like stress that comes down on people, myself included, of just like, okay, no one's seen this situation before.
Right.
What do we do? And so when it comes with all those like emotions of dread and fear and anxiety, like, do you have any suggestions for how people manage those in their day to day as they're just popping out fires or putting out fires one after another in the middle of this crisis?
Right. Well, the danger from a psychological perspective is that with all of the upheaval of the emotions and the intensity of the stress, if people aren't sleeping, if they aren't eating, I was talking to um, a person who's in a large organization that's the director of operations yesterday, and she and I spent quite a bit of time on the phone. She's been in meetings constantly until the hours of the evening. She talked to me about she's not eating right because she's eating on the go, and so we did some problem solving around what are you going to do for you. There has to be a place where we set some boundaries for our own mental health. None of us are going to be in a good place if we allow ourselves to sort of implode. And from that same psychological perspective, we all can reach. We're not to put us in the context of an automobile. We can't continue to run on empty. At some point in time, we'll run out of gas. So you have to get that refuel. You have to take time to take care of yourself. And so each of us, I teach classes for the university too here in the state, psychology courses. And so the other night with both of my classes, I took some time to say, okay, what are you guys doing to help care for yourself? So I think that's important. I think it's important to look at what we can do to manage the stress. And sometimes that's looking back on a situation in our life that we can call on to say, I made it through this particular time, and this is what I did in a healthy way. So when, a lot of times people turn to maladaptive or unhealthy ways, start smoking more or pick smoking back up, start drinking more. Well, I'll just have another drink tonight to just calm my nerves, and then maybe not sleep and do those unhealthy things. So for me, what I used to do, for me as a spiritual guy, spiritual modality was very important. I learned in graduate school to journal. I know a lot of guys don't like to journal, but I had to in graduate school. It was a part of a lot of my program classes. And so I've kept it up since graduate school. And I've found it to be a really good release for my emotions. And then I have certain, whether it's poetry or verses, I have certain verses from the Bible that I like to quote every day. And I usually do those every day as a reminder of myself to keep my focus in a positive way. There's a lot being said about mindfulness, being in the moment, taking time to rest, and then obviously to exercise. Exercise can go by the way because we're, so focused on, we gotta stay with our hands to the plow to make this thing work. But you gotta take some time. I'll use another story. So way back, I was in charge of an organization way back when I first started, and I had a bunch of guys in that place. It was when I was pastoring my first church. And I had a bunch of guys there who would say, you know what, we don't take vacations. We just work. And as a young guy, I was like, well, okay, well, I want to make sure I'm showing how tough I am. So I didn't take a vacation for the first 7 years. And I went into a state of depression for a while. Then we took a 3-week vacation, went to Florida. I came back so refreshed and so energized. I made a vow to myself then I was never going to do that again. I was going to take time for me because I needed it.
So do you think that is a possibility right now? Because we're obviously under various states of quarantine all across the nation.
Well, obviously we can't take 3 weeks. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
but you can take mini vacations.
Yeah.
In the context of where you're at.
and I think there's another dimension to all of this, because when you mentioned taking vacations, one thing that I know I struggle with when I like take time away is the sense of guilt of, oh wait, I'm responsible to keep the ship moving. Why am I focusing on stuff over here? But would you say that like there's, because I'm also worried about a dimension of guilt with people going like, I couldn't crack it. I couldn't make it go. I couldn't,
Yeah.
it didn't work. And the reality of the situation is no one made this.
Right.
I've told people
Right.
that my fear was, okay, I did something dumb and now we're in this position, but now everybody is at the same time
Right.
for no reason of their own.
Well, we as business owners, we all, I mean, if for whatever reason, an outside source, an outside, like the coronavirus, whatever it might be, if the organization doesn't make it through it, if it fails, sometimes we don't even like to even say those words. There's a sense of guilt and a sense of remorse. There's a sense of loss, and there will be a sense of grieving that we all will experience. All business owners that maybe their business will not make it through this crisis. So we talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was a famous lady that wrote, the 5 stages of grief, shock, and we anger, despair, and then recovery. I think I left one out of that. But anyway, the process, the succession in that. And so the shock of this hit us all. I think we're still in this level of shock phase right now. We're still going, we get up, I bet you got up this morning, I can't believe this.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, at some level, we're all going, I can't believe this.
I made a comment to my wife the other day, which is my dreams offer more solace than the real world at the moment, which is a really trippy place to be, where you wake up and you go, oh snap, there's still that coronavirus thing going on.
It wasn't just a nightmare, it's really here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think there's a very real possibility that some businesses will fail in the course of this whole thing.
Right.
And it's interesting that you draw a parallel between like a business failing and grief. Like they're kind of the same.
Right.
Okay.
It's in a sense, it's a loss of a dream for most people. When something dies, and this is what people don't understand, is that level of grieving and loss and how it can impact us psychologically. We put a lot of emphasis, and well, we should, on the death of a significant person in our life and the grieving stages that we go through, but we don't recognize that there's a continuum of loss that will impact us to the point to where we're going through a grieving stage. We're going through the grieving stages.
So, grief, I mean, and we're talking about like worst case scenario for the most part. Like from a business standpoint, obviously it's like put things in perspective. How's your family? Are they healthy? All that stuff. Because we have two fears going on right now. One is economic and one is health. And it's interesting watching the two sort of play together during this. But do you think there's value in people sort of ruminating, planning, or figuring out what worst case scenario looks like? Does that ease the tension, or does that just cause a bit of despair?
I typically live my life that way. I have always been one that looks to the future. If this happens, then what will I do? I think there's value in that. I think especially as business owners, as people in general, and we've been told this, but we don't always do it. We've been told we should have in our savings 3 months worth of income in case a crisis happens. Well, how many Americans live that way? So at this moment in time, we're probably going, okay, today I'll do this. And then, so this will be the forecast. I'm doing this in my own life with where I'm at in the company I've been working for. I'm on furlough. And so immediately I started seeing this coming in March. And I started sort of preparing myself and looking ahead and making adjustments to spending habits, income, and that sort of thing, and started evaluating how long I had before it got really to that crisis point. And I sort of went all the way through to the end, deduced it to the end. And I'm keeping my fingers crossed and hoping and praying that we don't get there. But
Yeah.
as each day comes, we do it.
Well, to me, because I kind of do the same thing. I often do the same thing, and I've done it. I just play by a strength of caution, I guess, where I tend to go through worst case scenario and go, okay, like we're okay. And I guess I'm a little worried about owners forgetting that there's a health crisis on the other side of this too, right? Like, sure, we've got an economic problem, but the economy is only a section of our lives. And if there's one thing you can't rebuild, like health can get to a point where you can't rebuild it, and a business you can't.
Right.
And so, like, for me, that's been sort of this thread of hope, to some degree. And like, my business is still sort of ticking along, granted at a much slower pace, because we're tied into the economy. Small business is our business. And so when small business slows down, I have time to do interviews with Kerry. So, but I think it just, there's a lot of owners out there with just unprecedented levels of stress that they don't know how to deal with and they don't know how to navigate. And it seems like your main tips are, get your thoughts out, stay healthy, because that'll help you get your thoughts out. And even though you're running through a time of crisis, do the mental exercises and the physical exercises to just keep yourself good.
Right.
At least at that point, you'll be the best you can be.
Well, and I have one other thing I'll throw into that. So Freud, in all of his glory, to reference him, Sigmund Freud, he, in all of some of the crazy stuff he came up with, he did have, there's value in some of the things that he has developed and written about during his day. And he came up with several, what he called his defense mechanisms. One of the defense mechanisms is called sublimation. So when I used to do a lot of grief counseling, a lot of loss counseling, and one of the things I would watch for is at what point in time can a person begin to shift that grief into an empowerment for good. And so I'll reference it, where a good place to reference this is MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. So this was a lady who lost a child from a drunk driver, and she took that loss. And so that term is called sublimation. You take something negative, you take something that is traumatic, a loss, a grief, whatever it might be, and you take that energy and you try to put that into the environment for good. What you're seeing today is a lot of organization, a lot of business, especially restaurants. Watching them being interviewed on television, you're seeing, we don't know how we're going to survive, but we're going in with just a small crew and we're making meals for people. So that's an element of sublimation. So it's taking what we're going through and saying, how can I help humanity for the greater good? Because as you said earlier, there's two facets going on here. This isn't something we did, purposely. This came at us. We're sort of victims of this in a way. And so there's two crises going on, one a business and one is a health. For me, I've kind of said, well, Kerry, I'd like to come out of this alive, regardless if I can come out of this alive. And so that's kind of my last point of detection is I don't want this virus. So protect myself there. And so people making masks, doing things for the community, that's another way of taking that energy, regardless of whether we survive. When we come out of this, the warm, fuzzy feelings, I guess, can be around the fact that we were able to focus in on the greater good of humanity and provide a service that would help us all survive this crazy thing.
Well, and it's interesting because one thing, there's a video I'm working on right now, which is basically like, there's a lot of social good going on right now. Businesses chipping in where they can, trying to make masks, help the hospital, help families, all that stuff. And I think that's wonderful, especially at a time when everybody's like tightening their belt, even
Right.
businesses. But so there's to spin this into marketing a little bit. There's like social good is also good social. So
Yeah.
what I've seen is, especially on social media platforms where you've got all these people suddenly having time on their hands to browse social media in a way that they haven't, and engage with social media in a way that they haven't.
Mhm.
Anytime that a business is doing something for the good of the community, it's exploding right now, and that's
Right.
heartening to see.
It is.
Seeing businesses help and be acknowledged that they're helping. So that's good. And I just hope that these businesses are able to stem the tide.
It really is altruistic.
Yeah.
If it
And,
comes across as self-serving, then
yes. And I've had to counsel some businesses away from being too salesy at a time when, because the business owner is freaking out. So like, we got to make sales. But if you push too hard for people at a time when they're struggling, you'll turn them off, and then you can't get them back.
absolutely.
Very easy. So I guess let's wrap it up. I don't know how long we're at now.
Okay.
I'm not paying attention.
Either.
So
This is fun. I've enjoyed this.
yeah, I appreciate the time. But I mean, so we don't know exactly when this is going to be done and things go back to, well, actually, this is a good question. Do you think that things will go back to normal, or how can people come to accept a new normal if it's not going to go back to normal?
Let me see if I can find my prophet hat. Hold on a second. It's over here somewhere.
That's a good point. You don't want to make a prediction?
I don't think we're going back to the way things were before. I think anytime there is crisis, I'm a history buff, so I'm reading a book now about the 1920s, and anytime there is national upheaval, it tends to have a cultural shift. And the good thing is, most of the time, it is positive. There are always those people that are looking to gain an upper hand, to help themselves. And it's amazing to me watching the news either last night or this morning, the scammers. Be careful with the scammers that are out there. It's like, what the heck? In the middle of all this, we still have people that just want to take advantage of others. But I think in terms of a national crisis, what you tend to see after a national crisis is you tend to see a cultural shift. And typically when it brings us together to rally together as a country, then that there is that moral shift, there's that sociological shift, there's that psychological shift that all takes place typically for the good of the country.
And so really, because what I'm worried about is business owners getting so depressed that they can't function well. Is there any sort of like final parting thoughts that you would give to owners who are struggling with probably one of the hardest times they've ever seen in business?
I would say that it's important at this point to find those connecting points in our lives. Maybe other business owners. This could be a good time for. I'm drawing a blank right now on the Rotary Club, or even your chamber.
Chamber, yeah.
To do Zoom meetings. Now, I mean, we can't get together, right? But this would be a great time for community leaders that are business owners to get together and maybe even form networks where they could support each other, have that support. So my point being, the connection that we make together is very important. There's a guy in psychology, his last name is Levison, and he wrote a book about, basically the analogy is kind of like our blanket toss here in Alaska, the Alaska Natives have the blanket toss. They put people around a blanket and toss
Oh, yeah.
somebody in the air. And so his metaphor is kind of like that. His analogy is the more people, the more hands you have around your blanket, the more psychologically well you are. And right now, that is very important. The more people, the more connections we have, the more contact we have in a positive way to reach out to others, it tends to help us get through this. If we start isolating, withdrawing, pulling away, going inside ourselves, ruminating on this, then that tends to just get dark. This is a good time to own what we're feeling and experiencing, and recognize it, and then pull together.
Cool. So, wrapping up.
Okay.
Where can we find out more about you and what you do?
Well, I sort of have this side business thing that I'd really like for it to work, and I think it's a great time and opportunity for this to happen if folks wanted the support and felt like they needed it. You can find me at www.hopeconcepts.com.
All right. Well, cool. I think we're done. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.